Welcome to SPE Live today, and our topic today is the importance of innovation, partnership, and consumer value to drive the energy transition. First, we'd like to thank the SPE Foundation for supporting this broadcast. And my name is Jim Slutz. I'm with the National Petroleum Council. Joining me today are Allyson Book from Baker Hughes, Ed Arnett from the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, and Dan Domeracki from the University of North Carolina. The four of us have spent, along with others, the past year working on the program committee for an upcoming symposium. And we're going to share a little bit more about that later, but we've been working a lot on these issues of oil and gas and sustainability. So, well, first, to kick this off, let me just share a fact that most people probably tuned in know, but the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the statistical arm of the government, they do a couple outlooks each year, and one is the International Energy Outlook. And that outlook from just this past fall has projected that energy consumption globally will grow by 50% by 2050. So that's a lot more energy that we need. And this is because of global population growth and GDP growth, and that's actually a good thing because that means less energy poverty. Less energy poverty means better health better health care, better higher standards of living around the world. But we're going to need new technology. We know that we'll need new energy sources, and those sources mean different trade-offs. And what we put forward is we should stop categorizing these different technologies and different energies as good or bad, and perhaps use the term trade-offs to discuss the pros and cons. Because this is going to be a huge challenge, and we're all going to need to work together to make this happen. And part of that key is going to be in one of our items in the title is partnerships. And one of our participants today is Ed is with TRCP, and TRCP has a history of working with industry and NGOs and government and all sectors. And at TRC meetings, everybody's welcome and encouraged to participate, and it's all part of getting things done. So Ed, please share some thoughts with us this morning.
Well, thanks, Jim, and good morning to everyone. It's a real pleasure to be participating this morning, and an honor to be working with the SPE and you, Jim, with the National Petroleum Council, and to be here with my fellow panelists on the event. Jim, I appreciate your perspectives on the terminology and using trade-offs when discussing pros and cons related to energy development. Indeed, there's really no question that there's always going to be trade-offs with any kind of development. And the old adage, there's no free lunch, seems to also be kind of fitting for our conversations. Let me just say a few things about my organization. I don't want to assume that all folks have heard of the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, or the TRCP for short. We were established about 20 years ago, and our founder's name was Jim Range, who was a prominent attorney and a Republican Hill staffer. But Jim was also very passionate about the outdoors and a strong conservationist. And Jim's vision was a partnership model that brought together the disparate voices of the sporting and conservation community to have a collective voice on federal policy on the Hill in particular. Now, we're a 501c3 organization. We have 60 diverse partner groups that represent today's leading hunting and fishing organizations that strengthen the sportsmen and women's and conservationist voice in DC, as well as in states across the country. So we work extensively on public lands issues in particular, which includes energy development, both renewable and fossil fuel development. Public access is a real strong component of our work, as is land use planning and land management policy that ensures people quality places to hunt and fish and recreate. But we also have other focus areas that include water, marine fisheries, private lands, and agriculture, and climate change. And all of these galvanize the need for partnership. Now, regarding our topic today, our organization's philosophy has always been in regard to energy development. And I think mostly our partners, I'm not speaking for them directly per se, but I think they have similar beliefs that this all centers on balancing those trade-offs associated with multiple use management. Our mission and our work focuses on policies to sustain and enhance fish and wildlife populations and the habitats that those creatures depend upon, but also those that provide the habitats that provide places for sportsmen and women and the broader public to recreate. So obviously, energy development that negatively impacts those resources creates a trade-off for our constituents, perhaps. But on the other hand, preservation and conservation of areas for wildlife may indeed be a trade-off the industry could feel. So the key is the proverbial balancing act, meeting the needs of fish, wildlife, hunters, and anglers, meeting our nation's demands for energy, and this can all be very tricky sometimes. So since our forthcoming conference in April is also about technology that helps us achieve sustainability, I will say that technology, of course, is critical. And recent advances in horizontal drilling, for example, is a great example, and can has greatly and will have great reductions in habitat and species-related impacts from oil and gas development. But I will say that technology is only but one tool in the proverbial toolbox, and it won't suffice on its own to achieve balancing those trade-offs in all places, all of the time. So we have to have good land use planning well in advance of development. We need to use the mitigation hierarchy, which starts with avoidance of critically important habitats or special places. We need fair, durable, and effective compensatory mitigation that helps maintain and enhance the habitat that was impacted. And we need those partnerships that we talked about. And I'll just quote our namesake. I'd be remiss if I didn't, when Theodore Roosevelt said that conservation means development as much as it does protection. And he went on to note that while he recognized the right of current generations to utilize our resources, he did not recognize in any way a right to somehow waste or otherwise rob future generations. And that quote right there is the very essence of this balancing act of the trade-offs that we're all working toward. And a final point I'll make this morning is that conservation and energy development are both long-term endeavors, and they both require assurances and certainty. So it's critically important that we have current and future policies, effective partnerships with industry and conservation groups, utilize those advancing technologies. We need all of that in our toolbox to achieve long-term conservation of public lands and to ensure their contribution to a more sustainable energy future. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Ed, and thanks for those some thoughtful thoughts to get us kicked off. And I'm going to tie back in. I mentioned an international fact, but in the United States, the energy outlook for 2050 is has increasing demand, but lower energy intensity. So, and in the 2021 EIA outlook, it shows no peak in petroleum and liquid fuels. It's still the most consumed fuel by 2050, and natural gas demand continues to grow. So, but we know we need to address climate. We need to make these energies sustainable, and we need, one of the issues we're looking at is technology to solve these emissions issues. So, Allyson, as the head of energy transition for Baker Hughes, you are working these issues every day. What do you think?
So, we talk about the energy transition fairly regularly. It's a part of almost like a household term, I feel like. In 2020 really accelerated the dialogue. There's this tendency for a lot of people to talk about the energy transition as being solely based on technology. But I like what Ed said and agree with him. You can't get to where we need to go, and that's the energy transition's working towards this sort of biggest societal goal in the history of mankind, right? We're trying to get to a net zero emissions position as a global economy, all right? And so when you take that into the frame, it's going to require a lot of different technology, but some technology won't work the same tech doesn't work everywhere. And there's this other pesky thing that's consumer preference, right? And so we might come up with something pretty fantastic in the technology space, I can point to examples, but I don't think we have enough time today. But we can come up with tech, but if it doesn't fit the consumer needs and it's not at the right price, the likelihood of adoption is low. And so that takes a strong collaboration with groups like the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partners and other NGOs, federal governments, et cetera. But I would like to also add that there's, in the dialogue today, so many people talk about a transition away from fossil fuels. But I'd like to point out in the sort of wise research of a friend and colleague from RFF, Richard Newell, he published a paper in 2018 that highlighted the fact that the energy transition has been additive and not subtractive. And you can point to numerous examples like that, whether it's in the transportation side or what we fall back on in terms of backup power when things like a grid falls, or fails. Notably, if there's a big cold freeze like in Texas, people reverted back to using firewood. And in California, when the lights went out and they lost power, had rolling outages for a long time, they went back to backup gas generators from grid power and candles and flashlights. And so you utilize everything you can. The moment you start taking different components out of the fuel mix or the energy mix, you lead to more and more vulnerability as a society. So really the energy transition is banking on technology like what we use at Baker Hughes and we're developing is technology that you can basically apply to a range of different industrial sectors. Right. And then we work with partners to ensure that the technology fits the solution in a little bit of a bespoke kind of way. I don't think one size fits all. The facilities that exist today that we'd like to take to net zero are actually sort of a one of a kind. We don't have a rubber stamp process that makes every kind of ethanol plant the same or every refinery the same. And so the solution's got to be very nimble and it's got to be scalable and fit for purpose. And so I'll leave it at that, but know that we're transitioning to something that keeps everything in the mix. More is more in this case for tech.
Thanks, Allyson. Great points. So I think that leads us where we're talking about this technology issue. We've identified technologies required, but adoption, but it requires that we adopt the technology, and adoption requires consumers. And I think that was a really interesting comment about history. And I'll just kind of add, this of getting these. The challenge is not just getting low emissions, but getting them with consumer value. We look back to, in historical terms, to something like the moving from horses to cars. And in 1920, a car cost twice as much as a horse, and fuel was more than 2 times as much. But that car had 2 to 5 times the passenger capacity, and 10 times the cargo capacity, and 3 to 4 times the speed, and 5 times the range. So, but we'll go back to the trade-offs. We traded air emission, we traded solid waste for air emissions. So, anyway. Dan, you have spent a career in energy tech in the energy industry, retired from Schlumberger, and are now a member of the faculty of the University of North Carolina's Kennan Flagler MBA Energy Program. What are the overarching challenges and opportunities in developing and implementing technologies to address climate change and energy transition?
Jim? There you are. I lost you.
There you are. You're on, Dan.
Oh, great. No, listen. I think the key thing here, and it's a theme that seemed to run through both Allyson and Ed's discussion, is that we need coordination and collaboration between the various entities that are developing technologies, the government that needs to implement process or incentives, the industry that needs to reconstruct itself to deliver technologies that meet consumer as well as industrial needs at scale. In other words, the ability to have them operate in a manner that is consistent and operational benefit to everyone, or maybe a standardization of technologies to some extent. One of the things that we do at the Kennan Flagler Energy Concentration, it's an MBA program where the students are taught the full value chain of energy, the business of oil and gas, the business of wind and solar, the business of hydro, business of nuclear. And the idea is that the students would come out as part of the new workforce necessary to be able to help with this energy transition through completion. And their advantage and what they would bring to the companies that ultimately hire them is a very, very full understanding of the big business mechanisms of all current forms of energy generation. So just to use that as a hinge into the collaboration side, the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership has helped with their collaborations with many of us that were in industry at the time when I was with Schlumberger, to be able to work with the Department of Interior and the Department of Energy on test technologies or new technologies that would allow the Department of Interior, in coordination with the Department of Energy, develop better energy-related land use. You could maybe take it down to something as soft as how many megawatts per acre. And then you could look at the number of oil and gas leases and the energy density that comes from them. The hydro and the energy density comes from that. The amount of solar panels necessary to produce an equivalent amount to wind. And pretty soon, with the right algorithms and software, it would be possible to optimize the land use, the public land use, to meet what Ed pointed out very, very nicely, actually, about Theodore Roosevelt's belief that we don't have the right to rob the future of the energy, but we also have the right to access it, but we have to do it rationally and we have to do it pragmatically. And I think the underlying element there is the cooperation necessary. Perhaps the second element of that, and I guess what I'd like to point out here is with Baker at the university at Chapel Hill, we exposed our students to the National Petroleum Council. We've had students in the Teddy Roosevelt partnership working on the Hill, helping the Roosevelt group be able to educate the sectors of the legislators that need to know specific elements of energy in concert with what they need to know about land use. And Baker has been working on, amongst many other things, they've been working on energy storage, which is one of the parts of the energy transition for using renewables such as solar and wind that are still a holdup in the process. And so what Baker's been doing on that front is developing through research facilities in Europe different ways of energy storage. So at a very small conference, we invited a number of organizations over, both government, so it involved Germany and Italy and the UK and China and Mexico. And they came to talk about and share with one another what their research was doing, to the part they could where it was, nothing was patented yet. And what we learned is that the intermittency issue probably is still some way off before the technologies that all seem to work but do not work at scale yet. So so what we're doing, what we did with that is then we had some of them lecture the students in real time about what's going on in this research and what would be anticipated for actually taking some of the more promising technologies and taking them into the grid systems where they're so necessary. I guess one last thing I'd like to say before I close that out is that it is critically important that the technologies that we develop are encouraged, that there are some guidelines perhaps that the various governments or regulatory agencies can oversee, that assure that there's a standardization that allow these technologies, whether it's carbon capture or energy storage or new ways of generating, say, electricity from gas wind mix, that can all be done from one power plant, which is another goal. If that happens, what it does is it clears a lot of rocks out the road so that the small entrepreneurs that can participate in developing new technologies and larger companies like Schlumberger and Baker and others that are developing technologies for application all know the ground rules and are helping to develop technologies that can be implemented rather rapidly. And the reason I bring that up is that if we believe all of the timescales, if we don't find the solutions in technology coupled with government and academia and NGOs and everyone involved so that we have a generally agreed upon platform going forward, we will lose time and we will find ourselves requiring the use of gas and other fossil fuels for much longer than we would really like to. So with that, I'll close.
Thanks, Dan. Really appreciate you. And thanks, Ed and Allyson as well. I think we've laid out some fascinating issues. We'll just have time for a couple questions, and I just like to do a little bit more about this this concept of changing the dialogue on trade-offs and rather than the good or bad. Do you think this is possible to get a neutral term out there? Is it important? Do we need to get there if we're going to be open to game-changing technology? And I'll throw some in. It's not just this continuing demand for oil and gas. Something like, you look at something like small-scale nuclear energy that many are seeing as an important component of the system. Do you have any thoughts on the importance, and can we get there too? What do we need to do to get there to get a more constructive dialogue?
Do we raise our hands, Jim?
No, jump in. We've been friends for years. Let's just jump in.
I'm going to raise my hand. So I would say, we didn't mention the I word, which is innovation here. And so the IEA has actually come out in their most recent, I think one of their most recent reports and they pointed to the fact that only 25% of the technologies that we're going to need to really realize the energy transition, again, going back to the net zero positioning for society, all right? Only 25% of the tech is available today at scale and commercially available. So that means we've got a long ways to go in that innovation space. So your small modular nuclear is tantalizing, as are other things, such as I have also heard, and I'm not endorsing, okay, but the one that kind of really throws me for a loop is compact fusion. I'm like, have we proven fusion at scale? That's one of those things that's out there that I still feel like is out there, but yet I hear that there are some really truly like game-changing things on the horizon, and we it's not that we sit and wait for them. We've really got to start to think about how do we enable scale up and then testing those out with partnerships, right? And so where we're headed is going to need more of that collaboration, but a lot more innovation. And so there's something like a third of that number that's remaining is in the development phase right now. And then there's this large chunk that has yet to be determined by the IEA's numbers. So it'll be interesting. I'm interested to hear what everybody else thinks about it.
I'd like to jump in. I'd like to jump in on the nuclear part that Allyson brought up. You could very clearly pose the question based on Jim's trade-off of solid waste for the air pollution that ultimately occurred, and then the advances that were made as internal combustion engines grew in trying to contain the pollutants that were coming out with the advent of nuclear. If we have a serious dialogue on this planet about totally reducing carbon or trying to hit net zero, how can you leave nuclear out of the mix? There are trade-offs, but the development and the amounts of money that are going into SMRs right now, with the idea that they can be distributed equally across grids where it's appropriate to have them and release no carbon and would be safer than any nuclear plant that we've ever had before, seems to me like a trade-off that's worth pursuing or at least considering in a very serious way. We're going to have a lot of those in the future, but to me, that's one of the most fundamental. Anybody want to take that one on?
Thanks, Dan. Let me jump into one that maybe with I'm just thinking that Ed, these you get into some of these regulatory issues, you have very long time frames, and part of that's because we need to have a lot of people at the table. But can we shorten some of these regulatory time frames so that we can move some of these technology quicker? Now, some of those are just by the nature of scaling up technology. It takes a long time to test, for instance, a new turbine or a new nuclear power plant, but also we have regulatory timeframes that are very long. Can we protect the can we make sure people are heard and protect the areas we need to protect, but still have more reasonable permitting time frames to get, for instance, whether it's new pipelines or new electric transmission lines that are likely to be needed?
Well, I'm an eternal optimist on a lot of fronts, and it's part of the reason I mentioned that a fundamental issue here and a key component of getting to a streamlined regulatory process, if you will, is better planning on the front end. And part of the problem, though, is that there are administrative processes that continue to slow it down on the tail end of things. So my feeling has always been that if we plan really well on the front end and provide the right incentives for avoidance and mitigation measures, and minimization techniques that utilize technology to minimize impacts, if we get as much of that front loaded, our organization has no issue with more quicker regulatory processes on the tail end, but it starts on that front end of the planning. And I think there are ways to incentivize that. There are ways to garner those insurances, but we have a little ways to go and kind of working through some of the land management agency processes, gaining trust from a broader public far beyond our organization, but beyond or into general public and other organizations. But I think we can get there.
Thanks. Our time has gone really quick. Can I ask, does anyone have, let me ask if any of you have some final quick 30-second closing you'd like to add, and I'm kind of hitting with that cold. So, but please jump in if what is that one final point you'd like to leave our audience with?
I'll go. Okay,
Allyson.
so I'm always raising my hand. So I would say that like, don't think ideas are crazy, right? We're trying to go someplace that we've never gone to before in the history of the world. Okay, thinking about carbon as a solution to a really big problem, and so there's always a tendency to hold on to ideas, and we innovate around the edges of it, and we really sort of redesign things and streamline, right? But as you stated, going from the horse to the car, people at first were very skeptical about the car, right? But yet here it is today. We still have horses, all right? People still like horseback riding, and we still have a range of sophisticated cars out there, and that'll be the next generation of car, and then hovercraft. I can't wait, and jetpacks. But that day is coming. So let's put all of the options on the table. Keep reliable energy in the mix while we do it, okay? Keep everything together and think about what is the solution like, and then take everybody with us so that we don't leave something behind and live to regret it later.
Thanks, Alice. Dan?
Yeah, just quickly, global cooperation is going to be necessary. The whole concept of that this planet is a single planet, solutions that only work in Europe and North America and transfer problems to other parts of the world don't solve the problem. So coordination, what's trying to be done with the Paris Accord and other elements of outreach between organizations is going to be absolutely essential to finding an effective problem to this climate change issue that we're all working on.
Thanks, Dan. Ed, last word?
Well, I think I'll come back to my point on the long-term endeavors here. We've all been experiencing political pendulum swings of late. And I think that we could all agree that that's not good for business, and it's certainly not good for conservation. So we need long-term durable policies that survive multiple administrations. But to get that, we need to build the public trust. We need to demonstrate what those trade-offs are and demonstrate that business is not mutually exclusive from conservation, and keep all the tools in the toolbox, and keep our eyes open to what those trade-offs are, realizing that, of course, there's never going to be a free lunch.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ed. Before we close, let me just share with our audience. I mentioned the symposium. Well, first of all, let me first thank the audience for attending. We hope you've enjoyed our discussion today and found some useful ideas or information. We know we don't have we don't have answers. Our goal today was to stimulate some thought, and hopefully the upcoming symposium will help advance that technology discussion. So the symposium we mentioned is the SPE, AAPG, SEG inaugural Washington, D.C. Oil and Natural Gas Technology Symposium on April 6th and 7th. It'll be in the afternoon Eastern time on both days. It'll be a virtual format, and we have leading speakers from oil and natural gas, sustainability, workforce issues, future technology. We have former CEOs, current CEOs. We have a member of the Biden administration, and we just expect this to be a really important get together, an opportunity to share what we're going, whether it's from methane emissions to new oil and gas, cutting edge satellite technology, to things like carbon capture, use, and storage. And then again, I mentioned, what does all that mean for our workforce issues? So again, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you especially to Allyson, Ed, and Dan for being part of our discussion, and look forward to seeing everyone on April 6th and 7th. Thanks again.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.